Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Born. Hey, did you know my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation? Head over to setitonfire.co to learn more. Well, my guest today is Ian Bergman, and Ian is a partner at Alchemist Accelerator, and he's also the head of Alchemist X. And I actually just had the opportunity to be on his podcast platform. We're going to throw that into the show notes because after you check out this episode, I want you to head over there and check out my episode with Ian. Ian, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so glad to be here, Natalie.
Well, I would love for you just to take some significant time and kind of break down your background for us. When I read your bio, I was like, I need Ian to share his background. I don't think I can do it justice. So I just want to dig in right there and start there.
Sure, the talk about yourself segment.
Yes, everyone loves it, right?
Exactly. Always a little awkward. But no, I'm glad to because we're on this conversation of innovation and maybe corporate innovation. And I think one of the most interesting things is so many people in this space have a very non-obvious path,
Yeah.
right? To get to caring about this thing we call innovation. And I think my path was very non-obvious. I've always been a technologist. I broke my parents' computer networks when I was a kid and rapidly tried to fix it. I was trying to play Wolfenstein 3D for what it's worth. But, I went and I got a politics degree and I thought I was going to do journalism. And then all of a sudden I ended up working in tech my whole life. So, how did I get here? I think there's a couple things. I was never taught what innovation was ever. And I think that's actually a good thing. Instead, I kind of kept finding myself in these situations where I was trying to solve hard problems. So if we look at my career, after I graduated from university, from undergrad, I was working in IT and I partnered with a friend to launch a journalism startup that's still around. It's a web journalism startup, rawstory.com. It's done great work on kind of left-leaning political journalism. I can take absolutely no credit for its long-term success because I only stuck around for a year because you know what I realized? Building and driving change is a lot of fun, but doing it as a startup founder was not my path. That is hard because you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, right? And I said, I want to build technology. I want to build products and services that impact large numbers of people. But for me, it felt maybe it was safer at the time, which is a weird thing to say, but maybe it was just more resourced or whatever it was. I wanted to do it kind of with a group. And so, long story short, I navigated my way through grad school and I ended up at Microsoft. Now, in the early 2000s, Microsoft was not what you would call an innovative organization. It has changed a little. We'll talk about that. But I ended up at this company where I was like, I'm going to be building products and services and they're going to touch millions and billions of people. And oh, what happened? I was like sitting deep in the bowels of some building in Redmond, like never seeing windows or the light of day, working on like Excel models for capacity planning and demand marketing around the world. I'm like, what am I doing? Right.
Mhm.
Here's the thing. It turns out that for any organization, the good times end. Pressure is exerted.
Yeah.
For most organizations, this is constant, but in any case, pressure will start to exert itself and you have to make decisions. And so I had the fortune to join the Windows team right at the time that iPad was coming out, Windows 8 was getting built, and the computing market, as anybody understood it, was getting shaken up. And
Not the XP time. Just to be clear, you did not join
Windows 8.
Windows XP.
I joined halfway through the development of Windows 8. And for those of us in the PC world, it doesn't matter what your opinion is, you have an opinion on that product. And so, what was interesting for me, I joined into the organization that was working with outside partners. It was working with the system manufacturers, the PC OEMs, the Dells, HPs of the world, the silicon providers, like you name it, all the people that actually create a computer that somebody buys.
Mhm.
And what I realized It took me a while to realize this, but what I realized is that, well, there was a deep vision for the software that was gonna be built, and it was risky, and it was experimental, and it was new, and it was different, and in many ways, it was brilliant. What was missing was this whole question around how are customers going to use and buy and use this bloody thing,
Mm.
right? Like, what is the customer-centric vision that encompasses the hardware, the software, all the pieces to actually create a product? Unfortunately, it was missing, and I think that led to a lot of the challenges that we had. Anyway, I complained about this a bunch, and when you complain enough, eventually someone gives you responsibility, and I ended up leading a hardware planning team that was designed to kind of provide some vision for how all this would come together in hardwares. And I learned a lot because working on hardware planning, you're working on a multi-year roadmap, you're making decisions that have a lot of latency. It
Yeah.
takes, once you make a decision, you allocate capital, it's years later that the actual results come out, and you have to make some bets. And we made some big bets. Some of them that weren't turned out really well, like the importance of touch on touch screens and building
Mhm.
supply chain, and some of them that didn't, like dual screen and secondary screen devices and having screens all around us. And the ones that didn't, turns out it's because we didn't have the listening mechanism with customers.
Mm.
Okay. So you asked me to go on. I'm going
Yeah.
on. But the reason I mention this is because my next role was working with startups. And I was working with startups from within inside Microsoft, which is this huge organization. And we had this really interesting thesis. Hey, startups are building cool innovation. Hey, enterprises who are Microsoft customers need innovation or they're going to go out of business, which is kind of true. Boy, we can make them meet. And it is so incredibly hard to make them meet in an
Oh,
effective way. It is so incredibly hard for them to speak the same language, and it's so incredibly hard for for these large enterprises to put on this customer-centric mindset of there's a pain point that my people, my customers, my partners have, this kind of risky but cool new piece of technology or innovation can
mhm.
help solve it. I'm going to integrate it. That I was like, "Oh, man, this is a world I wanna live in." So, when I left Microsoft, I joined Alchemist Accelerator. We work with early stage technology companies building incredible new technology for the enterprise that's gonna be sold into organizations around the world. We work with hundreds of startups a year, and I get to live and swim in this world of, like, the fire hose of innovation coming up on startups on one side, and the pain points of large corporations and the challenges and the success and the joy they have when they achieve success, incorporating that innovation to stay competitive. And it's super fun.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the things you said in your kind of your tenure at Microsoft. You kind of talked about this idea of you were partnering in some places, you were building in some places, and then you were just, outright buying in some places. For those who are, kind of thinking about that build, buy, partner pattern, can you unpack a little bit about just some of the principles that need to be in place, especially around innovation when we're trying to figure out what's the right fit for us as an organization?
Oh, yeah. I think this is such a fun question. So, if you're a leader or even just an agitator within a large company and you're like, I want to change something, how to affect that change is such a core question. And so I think you know what I mean when I say the not built here mentality?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, okay, so I'll use the Microsoft example, but I think this works everywhere, right? So many organizations, even if you build the case, you're like, all right, I want to do something new. I want to build something. So many organizations are like, we should do it ourselves,
Mm,
right? And it's because they have this mentality where if we didn't, it's either riskier or maybe we're just not getting credit for it,
mhm.
etc. And I think that is actually so very dangerous. So I'll tell you a story from my time at Microsoft. I'm speaking a little out of school here because this wasn't my team; it was an adjacent one. But I'll give a simple example of what I mean. Microsoft is an organization that builds software, right? Okay,
Mhm.
great. Like they're they're quite good at it, but that doesn't mean that they need to build every piece of software. And
Right.
so, everybody in your audience, I'm sure, remembers, well, okay, the ones that are as old as I am probably remember when swipe keyboards came out on the phone,
Yeah.
right? Instead of the touch typing.
Mhm.
Cool technology. Many people like it. It's a quick way to kind of work through a touchscreen keyboard. Well, Microsoft was looking at this and was like, we actually have to have that. Like, we have to be able to do something like that. That forces such an interesting question, like build, buy, partner, right?
Mhm.
And let me tell you what Microsoft did. Instead of taking $1.5 million and buying a startup that had this technology and saying, done with it, well, Microsoft said, we have a keyboard team. Like, of course, the keyboard team should figure it out, right? Like, and Microsoft built an inferior product because you know what? They had less resources assigned to it than
Right.
that startup that they could have bought off the shelf for $1 million. They had, I mean, I'm making this up. I don't actually know the resources, but honestly, it's probably like a PM, half of a PM's time, and an engineer and an intern. And they built an inferior product. Why do that? Because there's a not built here mentality. And Microsoft has made
Mhm.
enormous strides. Like Microsoft has actually become an organization that is extraordinarily good at this point at incorporating outside innovation. But I find this as an illustrative example because companies around the world, I think, really struggle in accessing innovation that is outside of their core competency from the outside world for many, many reasons. But of course they should. None of us can keep up with the change in the world.
Right.
Can
Well,
a
let
food
me
and bev company do AI? Like, no.
well, let me insert a question here that most people should be asking that they probably don't. How do you know that you're not the right skill set to do something? Because, like you said, they had a keyboard team. Why wouldn't we kick that to the keyboard team? At what point do we realize, you know what, that's the wrong decision? That's really, I think, the crux of the issue is how do you know you're in too deep?
Yeah. You know, I'm going to flip this back. I wonder if you have an answer. I don't actually have an answer. The thing that I tell folks that I'm working with when we're working with large enterprises is to ask the question.
Yeah.
Like, first, just stop and ask the question, right? And sometimes it's as simple as that, because that
Mhm.
asking the question forces yourself to do a little bit of kind of a cost analysis,
Right.
and I think to recognize something that I think is very common.
Yeah.
If we are gonna do this ourselves, do we have the right, like, this is just a question, like, do we have the native right to do it well?
Mm.
And are we going to resource it and put it in an environment where this can get done well? And generally, you can kind of, I think you can actually, you don't have to put a lot of science around that question. I think you can kinda get to the answer pretty quickly, and if you have any concerns about it, well, go look and see if somebody else is doing it. They might not be, but if they
Right.
are, great.
So one of the people I had on our podcast is someone I used to work with at Career Builder way back in the day. Her name was Nagini Indugula. And her and I worked on a team together. And at Career Builder at the time, years and years ago, we tried to create a social media product. And we got somewhat far with that product, but eventually realized that we were building something no one wanted, or maybe it was too early stage in the market.
Sure.
It's one of those things where sometimes we're in self-denial. I mean, I think if we dig deep and really ask the question, like, should we do this? I think, like, the answer might always be staring us in the face, but then there's something in us, I think, as inventors, right, that feel like we need to push the boundaries in places that we have no capability, no skill set, no knowledge, no understanding, versus things that are naturally within our wheelhouse, and there's a natural economy of scale for us to build it. I think we're leaning into a little bit of just over indexing on our competencies, thinking our competencies are higher than they are. I mean, I really think that is what it boils down to.
You know, I do too, and I think there's something very human in that, right? Because you have to have a certain level of humility to let go, but you also have to have a certain amount of trust and comfort in those around you, right? That you'll be rewarded for letting go. But there's something, Rachel Chalmers, a wonderful colleague of mine over the years, there's something she says that I really like, which is an innovator has to fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Mm,
And if you force yourself to fall in love with the problem and to deeply understand it, to understand the pain, why it matters, who's impacted, that is a huge value add. And then you have a lot of white space to find what is the right solution. And I think for any of us who are thinking of ourselves as innovators in an organization, I would suggest fall in love with the problem,
Mm.
know it, breathe it, understand its relevance to the customers. And then you can look at your option set for the solutions.
Yeah, you're triggering something that most people don't do, and that's look at the option set. I think it's this idea that, like, I'm just gonna build it. So I looked at the problem, see there's is a problem, and now I'm gonna go build versus saying, "Well, is that the right approach?" There's a slowing down in that too that it takes to really ask some hard questions, and I think you're right. Like, there's no right or wrong answer that just immediately emerges on the surface, but through a series of questions, right, we can go closer to the knowledge that needs to be surfaced on that by asking, which a lot of people don't do. We just start building.
We just start building. Go fast by going slow sometimes,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. We just start building.
Yeah,
We've all been there. It's what humans do. It's definitely what engineers do, who are often the ones that are, tasked with solving these problems.
yeah.
But go fast by going slow.
I think there's something so important about what you said. So let's talk about blockers inside an organization. So oftentimes, people are like, okay, yeah, let's take the time to really look at the lay of the land. But then sometimes what they hit as just a hardcore wall is kind of the political nature of navigating an organization when trying to figure out some of these things. So let's take a moment in terms of innovation and lean into what are some of the blockers when we do have an instinct that we need to slow down, ask some hard questions. Should we build? Should we partner? Should we buy? What are some of the ways you can navigate those treacherous waters within an organization?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. It's such a good one. It's one that I have so much passion around and so few definitive answers, right? But it's good. So look, one, when you get to the point of thinking about blockers in an organization, I would encourage anybody to pat themselves on the back for getting that far, because you've decided you want to be a champion, a sponsor, an advocate for change and action, right? Blockers don't matter if you're not taking action, and you
Mm,
don't do innovation without action. So, first pause and say, good job, me. And now we look at things like, okay, what are some of the blockers that I hear from companies? I just got back from corporate innovation leaders workshop that we run with a bunch of international enterprises. And it's incredible how consistent the feedback is about the hurdles to change, right? Culture. There's a bunch of aspects of culture, but are lessons rewarded, right? Is risk taking and learning lessons rewarded, or is failure punished, right? There's a bunch of
mhm,
aspects to culture. You get organizations like procurement and compliance organizations, which a lot of people feel are real hurdles to innovation, especially if that innovation requires working with third parties. Because what are these? These are risk protecting organizations, right? They're designed for efficiency at what we do. They're not designed for something new. You get things like time horizons, right? Innovation, often real change and real ROI, often takes longer to realize than an organization can measure,
yeah.
and you get misaligned incentives. One thing though, and what we can talk about any of these, but one thing though that I also think people overlook a lot, and I have overlooked a lot in moments in my career, is the importance of stakeholder management,
Mm,
right? Because all of these challenges can be overcome if you build the champions, if you identify the other people who are going to become heroes because of the work that you're doing, if you identify your dependencies. For me, this is a piece of the go fast by going slow.
mhm,
Pause, think about who's involved, think about not just what their job is and what they're paid for, but who they are as people. How do you activate their ego? How do you get them on side? These are challenges that I think people underinvest in, but are necessary for driving change in an organization. So we can talk about any of those, but the stakeholder one's a big one that comes up all the time.
yeah, I wanna in our kind of our last piece of this segment, I wanna hover there for a second because I feel like what you're leaning into is stakeholder management. You actually have to have it's a word you said earlier, you have to have a little bit of humility because no doubt they're probably gonna end up getting some credit for whatever idea you've brought to the table. However, your idea may not see the light of day without taking the time to bring stakeholders along for the journey. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think most people have a fear of, if I, get too many people involved, my voice is now watered down and out of the way. Maybe someone else takes my idea and runs with it. And now I'm not even a part of, like, there's all these fears I think that come up in people when you say stakeholder management, bring people along
Yeah.
for the journey. It instantly people get kind of catty.
Well, they do, and look, like, to be fair, sometimes with good reason, right? We all know the challenges that folks have getting appropriate career progression when they don't speak out for themselves, right? And there's gender dynamics, there's all kinds of things that happen there. So that fear is well founded, but here's what I would say. Nobody does anything in this world on their own,
That's right.
right? Boy, I will just start arguing with libertarians, right? Like, you're building on someone else's roads, you're working with other people. You can't get things done on your own. So the question becomes, what are some specific concrete things that you can do
Mhm.
to be deliberate about getting other people to help you be successful? And yes, sometimes that is sharing credit. So we have a few things that we recommend, right? The idea of building yourself, an innovation governance board with big capital letters is really important. It doesn't have to be formal though. It might literally be the 3 people that you just have said, "I wanna come talk to you about what I'm doing," every 3 weeks. Um, or it might be more formal, but build a group of people with whom you can test your ideas and that you look to as sort of authority figures, and even better if they actually have budget and authority. But also, when you are creating champions in other people, if you're working on an innovation that, I don't know, that makes a marketing executive do better against their goals, when you make them the hero, when you tell the organization about how incredible this executive is, you're the one telling them.
Hmm.
That credit reflects back on you, and then you can go to others and just be like, "Here's how I can help you."
Right.
So, you know, I really do believe in creating champions by making other people look great. Most people will pay it forward. I do believe in a governance committee board of some level of formality or informality. And I do believe in the importance of providing updates. Secrecy serves no one. Like walls, tents, internal secrecy. People get so hung up on confidentiality on
Mhm.
anything, but much less innovation. Confidentiality is worthless 95% of the time, right? Tell people what you're doing, and that's how you get credit.
Yeah. Wow. Tell people what you're doing, and that's how you get credit. Ian, it has been awesome just to talk to you and to
Yeah.
hear a little bit about your background, your journey. And as I said, check us out on Ian's podcast as well. It'll be in the show notes. And yeah, thanks again, Ian, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. These conversations are super fun. I think innovators, we're all in this together. There's a lot of people looking to drive change. I'm super, super glad to be able to have this conversation with you and your audience.
Awesome. Hey, Ian, where can people find and follow you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So check out LinkedIn is probably the best place. Ian Bergman. Alchemist Accelerator is just alchemistaccelerator.com to see what we're doing organizationally. And we'd love to see you on the socials.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership. And visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.